Hey class, I'm coming to you today to talk a little bit about the first speech that we're going to be doing in this Communication Studies 12 class. While we're in class, we're going to go over the effective ways to organize as well as deliver your speech, but this video in particular is going to serve to talk about the content portion of your speech and how to effectively fulfill the requirement of justification in your use of images. Let's take a look really quickly, if you will, at this first paragraph in the handout that I gave you. It says that in this 2 to 3 minute speech presentation, you're going to bring in an artifact of your choice. You're going to bring in some type of picture or an advertisement or maybe a 30-second or 10 to 15-second, I would say, blurb of a video or perchance even some kind of music if you wanted to. The purpose of this speech, and this is where the content of what I'm going to talk about today is going to assist you in. But the purpose of this speech is to justify to the audience how your artifact fulfills the social functions of rhetorical discourse. What do we mean by the social functions? Well, in the reading that you have for the first chapter that we covered, The Origins of Rhetoric, there starts on page, and I believe it is page 17, you will see that it starts to talk about the social functions of the art of rhetoric. There are 6 different characteristics, much like those characteristics that we had that we reviewed in our test. What marks something as being rhetorical is one. Then we take it a step further and we understand that rhetoric also serves a social function. It provides us with something in the world, and it acts as a vehicle through which social lives, ideas, political ideologies exist. And it can rhetorically be delivered to us through the many vehicles that I talked about before, such as advertising, or images, music, etc. In the interest of time, your job is going to be to choose either 2 or 3 of the marks of social rhetoric. And in your main points, you are going to work to justify how your artifact fulfills those social functions and actually has those particular characteristics. Let us go through some of these 6 characteristics, if you will, and I'm going to give you some examples of what they look like so that you can see just how all of this works. So the first, and mine, this is just the recording device that I use, so that's why I've put this up there. The first type of function of rhetoric, and mind you, unlike the first characteristics that we went over in class and that you did on your exam, social rhetoric does not have to have the markings of each of these. They will oftentimes have the markings of many of them, but it does not need to have all 6 to be considered a social function of rhetoric, whereby the characteristics of rhetoric had to be marked by those particular ones that we spoke about before. So let's go back and we'll start to look at some of these. The first type of social function is that rhetoric tests ideas. What does this mean in essence? Well, it means that we are going to find out about how individuals are going to respond based upon the rhetoric that we present. It allows ideas to be tested on the basis of their merit. Now, this doesn't mean that something isn't going to be put through to be a social influence in our world if it isn't worthy or of merit, because we know we've seen advertisements before that don't necessarily have those characteristics to them. However, what we want to do is that this would be something that has in fact been wildly accepted by society, and we can prove that in fact the ideas that were tested upon have clearly gone through the process to create this type of social rhetoric. So what process? So what this process entails is checking and making sure that you have covered and reached all of your bases when or before presenting a rhetorical statement, a rhetorical advertisement, a rhetorical image. Why do we want to test ideas? Well, we want to make sure that we've done our homework in order to reach the largest group possible. And how does that happen? Well, oftentimes it happens by doing different things, like maybe doing some type of focus group to ensure that the rhetoric that we've presented is effective. Perchance it means talking to somebody on the opposition and seeing what their argument is, and then constructing an argument against that opposition or in favor for that opposition, however it intends. Perchance your rhetoric that you've created doesn't address that opposition, and you decide, okay, we're going to rework this so that it does address the opposition, and in that way it will be more widely seen. An advertisement or some type of rhetoric that you may want to look for is something that maybe went through two versions. I don't know if that you may come across something. One semester I had a student who did that. They showed like the first initial version and then the version that actually went to print. And this was a way for us to see how the social rhetoric tested ideas. What wasn't available in the first image were things like numbers or facts or statistics, and whereby the second image had those added in. Whatever type of focus group or testing that it went through to find out that that's what an audience needed in order to be most effective and for it to be an effective social campaign. We may not always know when we're presenting the information to the class, particularly within this speech, but having a good idea of that, they gave you one image and then we see another image of how it's changed. You can also look at an advertisement, perchance, that has changed from year to year if you wanted to. You could put two side by side, and what you could do is say, well, this was the original one in 1950s and this was one in the 70s, and we can see how the ideology of the 50s was presented, but clearly it changed in the 70s, and we can assume that this is because ideas of rhetoric were being tested against society and against what they were willing to accept or reject. And that is one of the markings of social rhetoric, that it changes over time, that it's being malleable, that each of us will have, even if we're composing a speech, we're going to change it, we'll run it by someone, we'll say, did that make sense? Was that persuasive? Did that help you? Campaigns are done on this all the time. Individuals will give campaign speeches, and those things will go through 200-300 rewrites before they ever see the stage, making sure that they can appeal to the broadest amount of individuals at a time, or making sure that everybody is understanding what they're saying, or that they're hitting the ideal points of that particular target demographic. So if you can see this idea of testing ideas and that planning from the characteristics of rhetoric go very hand in hand. So that's the first one that we want to look at. The second thing is that rhetoric assists in advocacy. So what does it mean to be an advocate? Well, it means to speak on behalf of any type of given topic. It gives our private ideas a very public voice. So what in the world are you passionate about? Or what in the world are other individuals passionate about? What social movements are going on that they've created advertisement because they want you to get on board? How is attention created about any type of issue that's going on? This is an important area to look at as a marking of social rhetoric, because this is a way for individuals to get their ideas out, for them to become aware of what's going on, to make sense of the world around them. So if we look at this first example that I'll put up here, this is an advertisement. It says, help us fight the effects of cosmetic testing, and it's the Society for the Protection of Animals. By utilizing this type of rhetoric, we can see that they are promoting some type of advocacy. And who are they advocating for? Well, animals. We don't want animals to become this commodified piece of our life that we treat in inhumane ways. This is one of the more humane and mindful advertisements that I've seen. When you see puppies that are hurt or sick, etc., that becomes a little bit problematic in my mind, and we'll get to why that is when we talk about Aristotle. But at least in this way, you see how this advertisement is is coming across for advertising, and how it's presenting an idea of advocation. The other thing about advocating for ideas is it will give a voice to ideas. It draws attention to them. It makes it possible for individuals to gain adherence. So if you wanted to talk about your advertisement and how it is advocating towards something, that would be a great marking of social rhetoric. It's clearly fighting for this idea, and it will enhance this understanding and awareness if it is done in an effective way, and if it's done in a way that is incredibly appealing to the audience. I'm going to go on to our next one, which is distributes power. This is what we talked about in your first presentation, or not in your first presentation, in your first exam, the idea of that rhetoric has with it a great deal of power. And there's three different types of power that we looked at, if you recall, from your first speech. And oh goodness, and let me just pull this down real quick. And I do not want to save that. And what this one ended up, or what these three types of power were personal power, psychological power, and political power. So let's look at how an advertisement can encompass all three. It can encompass one. You are more than welcome to highlight all three if you would like to, if you think that there is time enough to do so in your speech. But if not, and you just see the psychological power of your rhetorical advertisement, that is fine as well. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the first one, which is that rhetoric distributes power. What we know is that rhetoric holds with it a lot of power, and we've talked about that to an extent in class. You can give us a little bit of detail about that. But let's look at the personal power. Remember, personal power is something that gives the individual power over themselves, understanding a good idea of how to utilize rhetoric, how to write up an argument, how to support your claim, how to say something more than "because I said so" or "it's just wrong." Any of those words aren't necessarily rhetoric, but in turn, learning how to support the idea "it is wrong because," and giving us support to do so, gives you that type of personal power. It gives you an idea of success, and it adds to it. I've utilized this Barack Obama hope in an effect to show you a little bit of personal power. Barack Obama knew a couple different things. One, he knew that America was looking for hope. So this is not only something that is, if you will, testing ideas. We can clearly know that we had very little hope in the United States when he was coming into power during this last election. So clearly he tested the ideas to see that this hope thing is really going to work out, because man, was this a phenomenon or wasn't it? People loved this imagery, and people utilized it all the time to promote Barack Obama. And he too utilized it to promote himself throughout his campaign. The idea of personal power here was very effective. And again, I'm not quite sure that Barack Obama is making these choices, but in the case of the individuals who were doing his writing in specific, they had a great understanding of how this can this type of advertising or this type of rhetoric can obtain a great amount of personal power. This individual is going to be acknowledged. It is clear. It's effective. It's a way of advertising towards a goal that was set for themselves. That to associate this face with hope is a very strategic and rhetorical way of understanding. And so in this case, this image itself, or this type of rhetoric, is a definite social function in that it has given this individual a great deal of personal power. I'm going to stop this video and we'll go into the second one, or the next two features of power, in the next video.